Camera basics, here we go. What's up? What's up? You know what? I'm gonna leave it to you, Pete. We're gonna find us a nice, good spot to sit down and talk about today's topic. I think this is good. All right, so if you're new to shooting, there are 5 basic things you need to know. These are ISO, shutter speed, frame rate, aperture, and white balance. You need to understand these 5 things. So understanding how to use your camera and manipulating these settings to achieve the look you want is the first step in taking great photos and making great video content. While extra features and settings vary from camera to camera, the principles that I'm going to discuss today all play a role in photography and videography. All right, your first one, ISO or ISO, as some people like to call it. That's your camera sensitivity to light. Now, the higher your ISO, the brighter your image will be. And at some point, if you crank that ISO all the way up, you're going to see visible grain or noise inside your image. So you always want to kind of find that middle ground to where the image or video is as bright as you need it, but also as clean as you want it to be. Whew. Kind of winded out here. Hasn't been that long. This is like a good spot to sit down for a second. All right. Next is shutter speed. So shutter speed is the amount of time that your camera shutter is open, exposing light to each frame. For example, if your shutter speed is at 1/50th of a second, it's letting light in at 1/50th of a second for each frame. Now, the higher the shutter speed, the more crisp and jittery your footage will look in video, or the more sharper, the sharper your photo will look. A lower shutter speed, it begins to introduce motion blur. Now, for slow motion, you always want to shoot at a base of somewhere around 60 frames a second. Most up-to-date cameras these days can shoot at 60 frames a second. All right, so for video, to get that natural motion blur, you always want your shutter speed to double your frame rate. For example, if I am shooting at 30 frames a second, I want to have my shutter speed to at least 1/60th of a second. Does that make sense? All right. Now, for slow motion, you want to shoot at around 60 frames a second. Most cameras these days can handle 60 frames per second, and you want to slow it down to about 50% in post, and that is how you get slow motion. All right. Next is aperture. Aperture is the actual size of your lens's opening. And this opening allows light to pass through to your camera sensor. You can think of this similar being to the iris of the human eye. Now, this is going to get confusing. The smaller the number, or f-stop, the wider the opening of the lens is. The lower the number, the more that hole, that lens starts to close up. The wider the opening, less is in focus. You're going to have like a very creamy background, and with a higher number or closed aperture, more things are going to be in focus. All right, next is white balance. White balance is how your camera registers and takes in the light and gives it a color temperature. This color temperature is based on a scale which is measured in Kelvin. Now, the higher the Kelvin, the bluer or cooler your image is going to look. The lower the Kelvin, the warmer it's going to look. So if I want to, do a sunset and it's still kind of blue outside, I'm going to lower my Kelvin to make the image look warm or make the video look warm. If I wanted to look cold outside, I might boost my Kelvin to get it to, look a little cooler. Natural daylight, it's at 5600 Kelvin. That's 5,600. That's just daylight. Last thing is frame rate. Frame rate is how many frames or pictures that your camera takes per second. Now, to get that film look like you see in the theaters, that is usually around 24 frames a second. That is that crisp, clean, I'm in the movies. This is on the theater frame rate. Now, 60 frames a second is more commonly used for broadcasts and soap operas and things like that. Now, back to slow motion. The higher the frame rate, the more smooth your footage will look when you're slowing it down in post. So if I, again, shoot at 60 frames a second and I want to slow that down, I'm going to slow that down to about 50%. And it's going to give me a nice smooth thing. Now, if I do it at 24 frames a second, that is less to work with, and that's when the slow motion becomes choppy and jittery. There you have it, folks. That is it for today's video, and as always, be sure to like, share, subscribe. Peace.